Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 155, Meno 100a to C. Socrates has invested a lot of time and effort in this conversation, so it would seem that he is concerned with trying to make Meno think dialectically. He has tried making him remember earlier parts of the dialogue, compare various parts of the dialogue, and think critically. The art of the dialogos, the dialogue, is dialectike techne, dialectic. It would seem that Socrates has decided that he has done as much as he can for Meno, because he has just given Meno the fourth option to Meno's original question: what sort of thing is virtue? The answer Socrates has given is the sort of option that Meno would like, that virtue is something which comes to human beings by God or gods. The gods apportion virtue to humans, whatever that means. It's a very passive way of looking at virtue. Humans sit around all day doing nothing until the gods apportion them virtue. Meno, as we have already seen, is a passive character. He expects things to be done for him, or indeed to be done to him. It's interesting, though, that even while Socrates is providing Meno with the perfect answer from Meno's perspective, Socrates is doing it knowing that Anytus is listening, and Meno knows that Anytus is listening. Plato has ensured that we know that Anytus is listening by having Meno comment to Socrates that he thinks that Anytus would be upset by what Socrates is saying. It is then that Socrates provides the fourth answer. Socrates then goes on to say that virtue must be a divine portion unless there is a politikos who can make someone else a politikos. And it follows from what has been happening that Socrates would be talking about Anytus, who disagrees with the idea that one politikos cannot teach another politikos. But now we're in for a surprise, because Socrates carries on talking about the politikos who can make somebody else a politikos. Ede eie schedon antihoutos legoito toiutos entois osin, hoion efe homeros entois tethneosin ton teresian enai, legon pereautu, hoti oios pepnutai tonen adu, toidesciai aisusi. If there were, he would probably be said to be such among living people as Homer said Tiresias was among dead people, saying about him that he alone has breath, or full possession of his faculties, it's the same verb, among those in Hades, those who as shadows flit about. It isn't immediately obvious, but Socrates is quoting little bits of the Odyssey, which presumably would go down well with Meno, who was ecstatic over the quotes from Theognis and earlier Empedocles. Tiresias was a well-respected blind prophet, and he's particularly famous for having been at some point a woman, so he had experience of being both a man and a woman, and therefore he has the reputation for being wise, to the extent that in the Odyssey he is given this prominent position in Hades. For many Greeks, death involves the separation of the body from the spirit, and the spirit goes down to Hades. The poet describes the spirits as shadows, or like shadows, flitting about. They have very little characteristics of the living person. They're a stripped-down version of the soul. And Tiresias, for some reason, has a more fully functioning spirit, as if he still maintains the sort of spirit a living person has, where there is a fusion in the lungs between vapors from the blood boiling around the heart and air coming in from the outside. Vapors and air together form the fully functioning soul, at least in one of the medical theories. The point is that Tiresias does have a more fully functioning soul, which means that he is more self-aware, has more ability to think critically, and does not act like a shadow flitting around. Now Socrates finishes his analogy. Tautonan kaien thadeho toiutos hosper paraskias elethesan pragmae pros areten. In the same way, here too, such a man, as if in comparison with shadows, would be a real thing, pragma, with regard to virtue. So a politikos who is able to make someone else a politikos would be outstanding, while everyone around would be like shadows. This politikos would be a true or real thing, which is a very strange thing to say, that a person is a pragma, would be a real thing with regard to virtue, which means that these people around may not be like shadows with regard to anything else, but with regard to virtue, these people are like shadows. In other words, they don't have virtue, but this person does have virtue. And being a politikos who can make someone else the same as himself, Socrates is saying that this person who has virtue can make someone else have virtue as well, and that would be a very good thing. Socrates had begun this description of the outstanding man by calling him a politikos who could make one other person a politikos as well, but by the end he's just talking about him as such a man, and he's emphasizing virtue. We may understand that if he is a politikos who can make someone else a politikos, he is a man of virtue who can make another man have virtue. Is Socrates still describing someone like Anytos, or does he have someone else in mind? Even if Socrates himself is still talking about Anytos, Plato would like us, I suspect, to think of Socrates. Socrates is a politikos in the widest sense. He is a man of the polis who tries to make others behave as they should in a good polis. Meno all along has been talking about virtue in the context of politike arete, except for the generous answer in which he gave every type of person their own particular virtue. In general, he's been thinking of political virtue of the man in which he has influence and power and can help his friends and harm his enemies. This is also the notion of politike arete which Anytus has. Socrates then is leaving Meno with a contradiction. On the one hand, there's the politike arete, which Anytus advocates, where the politikos advises other people, and in that way they become politikoi. Or, and this is the wonderful answer that Socrates has given to Meno, it's actually the gods who provide people with political virtue without the aid of Athenian citizens giving people advice, the way that Anytus likes to think of it. Currently, Meno is impressed with the fourth answer and probably the references to Homer, and he responds, "Kaliste dokes moilegen, O Socrates." You seem to me to speak very well, Socrates. All that is left for Socrates to do now is to give some concluding remarks. Ekmentoinun tu logismu o menon, thea moira he min, fainetai paragignomene he arete, hoisan paragignetai. From this reasoning, Meno, it seems that virtue comes to us by divine portion, to those to whom it does come. Reasoning, logismos, is what doxa requires to become episteme. We might think then that the conclusion that virtue comes to people by divine portion is a piece of knowledge. Todes fes periautu esometha tote hotan prin hotini tropotois anthropois paragignetai arete proteron epichereso men autokath autodze ten typot estin erite. But what is clear about it we will know then when, before examining in what way virtue comes to be to people, before that we shall try to examine virtue in itself, what on earth it is. Nun de moi men hora moi ienai, sude tauta haper autos pepesai, pesecaiton xenonton de anuton, in a praoteros hos an peses tuton, estin hotikai Athenaius oneses. But now it's time for me to go somewhere, and you, with these same things which you have been persuaded by, persuade also this here host, Xenos Anytos, so that he might become more gentle, so that if you persuade this person, it's possible that you will benefit Athenians as well. Socrates doesn't know what Plato would like us to think, that Meno could persuade Anytus not to be angry at Socrates, and that would benefit Athens, because then there would have been no prosecution of Socrates and he wouldn't have been killed.